Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Steve Redhead. Now, I adore talking about assessment, and I'm really interested in how university academics are constructing assessment in what are quite difficult times. And Steve, you developed in your module at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology a very interesting assessment for your legal studies integrating project module. What you configured in this module was, I believe, 4 stages of assessment. So could you talk us through what those assessments were and why you constructed the assessment in this way?
The Legal Studies Integrating Project, which was taught for fourth-year students for the first time at UIT in Canada, where I teach, was basically a real challenge in legal education. Normally, this kind of high-level seminar would be taught for probably postgraduate students, relatively small number of postgraduate students. This was taught for a mass undergraduate class. And one of the things I had to do was to overcome the difficulties, of course, not being taught before, assessed in a new way. And what I came up with was, as you say, what I call the kind of cascading assessment system. And the students said, again, some of the better students said to me that they wished they'd had this before in their teaching, earlier undergraduate studies. They really enjoyed it, and it felt like something that was new and actually developing their work in a particular way and really helping them. That's not to say that all of the students enjoyed it. I think the best ones did. But actually what I did was to have 4 assessments during the semester. I set up an early assessment so that they didn't flounder too much, and particularly the more challenged students didn't flounder too much. And the first assessment was basically a project outline, and that was only a few hundred words. They were going to have to produce, with my help, with seminar help, a 6,000-word essay, which was a lot for the students that we're talking about, at the end of the semester. So the project outline and proposal, if you like, was the first assessment. And they had to do a fair amount of work on aims and objectives, thesis outline, and so on, but a relatively small number of words. And they had to hand that in pretty early in the semester. The second assessment was going to be a choice of a key theorist that they were going to use in this 6,000-word essay project at the end of the semester. They found that quite difficult because a lot of these students weren't necessarily used to conceptual approaches, and certainly in some cases the most traditional legal students found it really difficult to know how you would use theory in this way. Anyway, they had to choose a key theorist. They could use more than one theorist in the project, but actually they had to use one key theorist. Sometimes difficult to get them to choose one rather than 5 or 500. But they did it, and that was quite early on in the semester as well. So the better ones, the ones who attended a lot of the time and taught in this high-level seminar, certainly got to grips with this pretty quickly. Sometimes the more challenged students found it difficult, but even they got written work down at a pretty early stage, and they got a lot of feedback. The third part of the assessment was a diary, a research diary, which they had to work on each week. They had to talk about the seminar that they were involved in, this high-level seminar with 50 students and me, and they had to reflect on the topic that was there each week, and also reflect on the development of their project, which was going to be this 6,000-word piece. That was actually handed in at the end of the semester on the same day as the 6,000-word project. But they were supposed to work on it each week with this reflective research diary. Again, difficult for a lot of the students. They'd never done anything like this before in their undergraduate work, but a lot of them really gained a lot of confidence in research at, as I say, what was pretty high level. So I was really pleased with the way that worked. And the fourth assessment was, in fact, the actual 6,000-word research project, which they had had to choose themselves. They'd had to work out what the content was going to be. A lot of the form was talked about in the seminar, but the feedback, individual feedback, was actually mostly about the content, because the content of the project was their own choice. Sometimes something that they were just interested in from the 4 years of their undergraduate work, sometimes a choice of a project that they were interested in because of their work placement, and perhaps just something that they were interested in the whole area of legal studies and criminology that they'd come across just as citizens. So it was quite a difficult and challenging assessment system. And I think that kind of cascading system did work. It seems to me that getting students to do the work pretty early on in a semester like this, which they may well in other courses have left right till the end, because they were used to that, students that I was teaching, actually got them working really at quite a high level pretty quickly. Sometimes it was difficult for the really challenged students and those who didn't attend, because they were lost at the beginning. But and in some cases, they did poorly in those early assessments. Even though there was feedback available for them, some of those students really struggled because they hadn't appreciated that they had to be there right at the beginning. But I think the cascading system worked because the best students, and I think there was quite a number of them, worked all the way through and allowed that 6,000 word project to be reflected on in the end, not just handed in the night before. They'd worked all the way through in this cascading system of assessment.
Now, why I'm so interested in this, I think what you've done here is extraordinary. I'm amazed by the research diary and the reflection that creates. So much of this, I think, is really beyond innovation. I think this is just some international best practice here. What I would say to you, though, Steve, about the verb and indeed the metaphor or the trope, if you like, of cascading assessment. It's a great verb to use because it suggests that momentum is part of the assessment protocol. So as each assessment is submitted, and you gave individual, pretty staunch feedback, clear feedback to every single student, you saw them individually. So the thing is, for those, say, less able students that you're talking about that maybe didn't do well at the start, if those assignments had been due at the end, they wouldn't have done well in the whole semester. So the thing about the cascade is that it provided momentum. So even the less able students, I would imagine, gained some sense of momentum, of movement, of improvement through the four. So we all know with less able students, they may only improve 10% in a semester, but as long as improvement takes place, that's a good thing. Would you like to comment about that momentum that's created by linking assessments in this way?
Yeah, I think that's true. Certainly in theory, the momentum argument is really important. It was like a rolling stone gathering moss. And even the weaker students, as long as they followed the system, and particularly those who came to see me individually in office hours, but also individually as part of the seminar programme, which was, quite extensive and quite long. If they did that, if they came for individual feedback and didn't just look for the mark, even the weaker students were able to get that momentum. And there's no doubt in my mind that, and from their feedback to me, it suggests that actually they learnt quickly what this new system was, and they benefited from it, and probably did pick up 5 or 10% on what they might have got in the past because of this cascading system. I think one of the things, though, is that in the end, the individual students who pick up on that have really still got to be able to be open to feedback, individual feedback on that work. They couldn't just simply hand in the assessment and leave it. Yes. I think it was the interaction, where it really worked, was the interaction of these assessments with the individual feedback from the tutor.
Steve, that's a tremendous presentation of what I think is one of, an incredibly innovative assessment protocol, particularly for students of mixed ability, I think. But my concern, as I've been listening to what you've been saying here, and I suppose concern shared by a lot of colleagues listening to this podcast, is it seems incredibly demanding on staff. And so would you like to offer a comment about that? Because you've got 50 students in this incredibly intense experience, and you did all the marking for this. So, what advice would you offer to colleagues about to instigate this type of process?
I use this as an experiment. I've taught great deal in universities, but I hadn't done assessment in quite this way before. So it was an experiment. It was something which I would have taught at a high-level postgraduate class in the past, but this was a maths undergraduate class with range of abilities. And I didn't have a teaching assistant, and it was an enormous amount of work. It was a stressful experimental situation. And I think if you don't have, say, a teaching assistant to work with in those sort of circumstances, it is a lot of work. But it seems to me that the actual system of cascading assessment is a good one. So it's a matter of trying. I think if I was doing it again, I would, if I didn't have somebody to assist me, I think I would try to perhaps lessen maybe the word length, because it was for these students, the fourth year undergraduate students, this was a lot of work compared to what they were normally used to. So I was actually asking them for lots and lots of different assessment, but then actually asking for what they saw as a long assessment. I don't see it as a long one, but actually they did. So maybe modifying it that way, that would be less work, it would be less words to mark, actually less words for them to do, but you would still get the same idea of the cascading assessment.
Yeah. Final question, Steve. In our university system at the moment, there's a lot of discussion of vocationalism, workability, preparing students for work. And obviously you've, unlike myself, you've worked in professional departments, so you're training students to enter the professions. A lot of your students were attempting to get into a law school. Could you explain to me what you think this type of assessment would give them as they enter a graduate environment?
The sort of assessment that I was aiming at for this range of abilities in the legal studies course didn't necessarily incorporate the idea of vocationalism, but actually a lot of the students I was teaching were doing work placements. So they were doing work placements in, for example, aspects of the criminal justice system, probation service, the police, sometimes working with judges and so on. And some of those students certainly were wanting to go on to law school in North America. But a lot of the students were wanting to work in the professions of the criminal and civil justice systems in quite a different way. They were going to use their degree to go on directly to that. And a lot of the project content that these people chose was actually related to their work placement. In some cases, they deliberately did it. They did surveys within the workplace for the research project, within the work placement that they were undertaking at the same time. So I think there was an inbuilt vocationalism for a lot of these people. A lot of these students were interested in social justice issues, but they were interested in it partly for the vocational aspect of their work. They were going to go into these sorts of professions in a way using the content of the project, but also the research aspects of the project. They saw, a lot of the better students saw these aspects of the research training, which I was giving them, as something that they could incorporate into their work in the police system, in the criminal justice system, probation system and so on.
I think this is incredibly important. Obviously, it's great for interdisciplinary legal studies. There's no doubt about that. I think all of us can use this. And can I just say the final element of this that I find so impressive is, as all of us are dealing with the widening participation agenda, it's increasingly important that we are able to scaffold information literacy, cascade assessment, so that the less able students at least have a chance of completing these assessments. But can I say what I'm so proud of in this protocol that you've constructed is you've often talked about the best students being challenged and achieving at a high level. And I think when we're dealing with the widening participation agenda, it is very important that we provide a challenging, innovative environment for the more able students, that we don't forget about the top end when we're focusing all our energy on retention rates and widening participation. And why I think this assessment you've configured is so important is it actually targets both groups. And I think that is incredibly rare. So thank you so much for talking through that with us.
Thank you.